There's great concern about the election counting that goes on seemingly forever, practically speaking, after Election Day. And, you know, it's just a terrible policy, I think, for obvious reasons. In many places, we are able to vote, or you're able to vote early, which I think is a terrible thing. I think you should be able only to vote on Election Day. And to the degree we have mail-in balloting, it should only be done in extraordinary circumstances. You know, if you're in the military or deployed overseas, you know, or otherwise have significant emergencies, you need a really good excuse to do a mail-in ballot. That's the way it should be. I think typically you should be voting in person on one day, and we should be deciding the winner on Election Day. And of course, vote by mail has significant concerns about fraud, which also need to be addressed and which many of the left refuse to address. And frankly, too many Republicans don't want to address as well. But one of the other big issues with vote by mail is how long you count the ballots for. I mean, is there a time when you stop? And is the time reasonable? And is the time compliant with the law? Is the deadline compliant with the law? And in Illinois, we alleged that contrary to federal law, Illinois is unlawfully counting ballots up to mail-in ballots that arrive up to 14 days after the election. So over 2 weeks, up to 2 weeks after Election Day, ballots are coming in, and their theory is that if somehow the ballot is signed on Election Day or beforehand, but even if the postmark is undated, they'll count it for up to 2 weeks. I mean, besides the horrible policy of that in terms of encouraging fraud, waste, and abuse, in our lawsuit that we filed to try to stop it on behalf of a congressman and some other citizen voters of Illinois, the congressman is Congressman Bost, it's illegal under federal law, we alleged. And we had this litigation's ongoing. I don't know when the court's going to rule. I don't know if, you know, the court in theory could rule before Election Day, or it could rule after Election Day, but it would change the rules if we're successful, certainly for the year 2024. I don't know what would happen in 2022. So I know there's great concern about the election counting that goes on seemingly forever, practically speaking, after Election Day. And, you know, it's just a terrible policy, I think, for obvious reasons. Don't you agree? And in addition, it's illegal because the federal law that we highlight, I think it's 3 U.S.C. Section 7. My colleagues will confirm that to me, and I'll fix it if I'm wrong. Basically says that Election Day is on Election Day for members of Congress, and similarly, it's Election Day is Election Day for the presidency. So this year it would affect election races at the federal level in Congress in 2024. Obviously, the presidency would be included as well. Now, the left tried to intervene in this lawsuit as a defendant. Now, what does that mean? It means they're trying to gum up our lawsuit by trying to come in and you know, make it more difficult for us to litigate, because the lawsuit is against the essentially the election officials in Illinois, the Secretary of State and the Illinois State Board of Elections, and the Democratic Party of Illinois, represented by the law firm that founded by Mark Elias, the controversial former Clinton campaign lawyer, caught up in Russiagate, tried to intervene, and the court said no. The Democratic Party of Illinois cannot meet its burden to show that its interests will not be adequately represented by the parties to the case. As a result, the Democratic Party of Illinois is not entitled to intervene as of right. Separately, because allowing them to intervene would threaten to delay this time-sensitive case further, the court, in its discretion, denies their motion seeking permission to intervene as a party under Rule 24B. Accordingly, the court denies the Democratic Party of Illinois' motion in its entirety. So here you had Mark Elias, the king of Democratic election lawyers, try to intervene for the Democratic Party in our case to muck it up, and the court said no. So the case is proceeding, and this is what the gravamen of the lawsuit that Judicial Watch has filed is about. The current Illinois election law allows vote-by-mail ballots received up to 14 days after the polls close on Election Day to be counted as if they were cast and received on or before Election Day. Illinois law also provides that even vote-by-mail ballots without postmarks shall be counted if received up to 14 calendar days after Election Day if the ballots are dated on or before Election Day. I mean, obviously inappropriate. Our lawsuit notes that the board was advised that the number of ballots received after Election Day through November 17, 2020 could materially affect the unofficial election results. Illinois' own data indicates that Illinois received 266,417 vote-by-mail ballots statewide during the period from November 3rd through November 17th. Most of the vote-by-mail ballots were received after Election Day, which would mean that as many as 4.4% of the votes cast in 2020 were received after Election Day. I mean, what if you showed up to vote the day after the election in person and said, you need to count my vote. I knew who I was going to vote for yesterday, and I want you to count my vote today. I mean, and what the less argument is that, well, the vote really is cast if it's mailed before Election Day. First of all, if it's undated, you don't know when it's mailed. But if it's cast, then why does the law, generally speaking, allow you to go in and change your vote before Election Day? If it's already been cast, how can you change it? So they can't have their cake and eat it too. And it's just terrible policy. If you're going to vote by mail, make sure it gets there by Election Day. That's when it's supposed to be counted. That's what we argue in the lawsuit, at least. Judicial Watch argues that holding voting open for 14 days past Election Day violates the constitutional rights of voters and candidates by counting untimely and illegal ballots received after Election Day and diluting plaintiffs' timely cast and received ballots. Defendants, which is the state of Illinois here, acting under color of law, has it deprived and are depriving our clients of rights protected under the First Amendment and 14th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution in violation of 42 U.S.C. Section 1983. It's a civil rights claim. So the Democratic Party failed to gum up this important lawsuit for election integrity. And, you know, as I said in our press release, we're supposed to have an election day, not election weeks or election months. Illinois' 14-day extension of Election Day beyond the date set by Congress is illegal, violates the civil rights of voters, and encourages fraud. Now, as I highlighted last week, Delaware, the Supreme Court there threw out a state vote-by-mail and same-day voter registration statute that violated Delaware's Constitution. So we're not alleging that, you know, they broke the law in the sense that there's a constitutional prohibition in Illinois on this necessarily. We're highlighting that this violates federal law and violates the constitutional rights under the federal system of voters when you start counting ballots way past Election Day like this. I mean, this is straightforward. So this is an important lawsuit, and it's one of many that Judicial Watch has to defend the rule of law on elections and to protect election integrity. We have lawsuits to clean up election rolls that are ongoing in Pennsylvania, in Colorado, in New York. We have a lawsuit related to getting access to election rolls. Another lawsuit in Illinois too. So we've got two lawsuits in Illinois. We filed a successful lawsuit in Maryland over rigging elections under gerrymandering. We stopped that and made sure that in that case it was the Democratic Party wasn't able to rig elections in Maryland and restricted that. So that was a great victory. These lawsuits to clean up election rolls led to massive cleanups in North Carolina and in California and in Kentucky. And I know in Pennsylvania, for instance, we sent a letter to one state saying you haven't cleaned up the rolls, and they said, thank you, We just cleaned up 69,000 names. So we do know that other states clean up their rolls when we say there's a problem here. You know, as even though I object to vote by mail, one of the reasons that I object is because I know the voting rolls are a disaster. They're hard to keep track of, and the best way to mitigate against having dishonest or dirty election rolls is to have folks vote in person. And the best way would be to have them present a voter ID, but that's a whole other matter. So the voting rolls are a mess in too many states, and Judicial Watch is doing its darndest, often successfully, to clean them up. So this core issue, though, was at the heart of a lot of disputes about 2020. You know, anyone who's observed vote by mail and counting ballots after Election Day, they know it's a problem. People don't trust the result when you start changing numbers after Election Day as a result of continued vote counting. That was the whole dispute about 2020. I shouldn't say the whole dispute, but it was a key dispute about 2020, where the President of the United States had a certain number of votes on Election Day, Trump did, and if they had counted all the votes they had, if they counted the votes they counted on Election Day showed that he was winning. And the vote totals changed, and he, quote, lost after Election Day as a result of additional vote counting that was conducted in an unprecedented fashion. So as a result, people don't trust the results. And in addition, there's legal problems with it, as we're alleging in Illinois. Now, YouTube is going to censor me if I say that fraud had a material impact on the 2020 election, and I'm not saying that in this case. What I'm saying is there are legal disputes about the counting of ballots after Election Day. And the left would have you believe, don't ignore the law, ignore the Constitution, and ignore plain common sense. And in my view, the left doesn't even like elections. I mean, we had this debate. I mean, if you want to see the absurdity of this elections craziness where you have early voting and vote by mail that take place 45 days ahead of an election. In Pennsylvania, had this big debate between the two candidates, Fetterman and Oz. And just think about that. I mean, people had voted already as far as a month before the debate. I mean, you could have voted for Fetterman and saw his behavior at the debate or his his obvious cognitive challenges and health challenges and said, boy, why did I vote for him? Or on the other hand, you could have seen Dr. Oz and said, I don't like what he's saying. Why did I vote for him? I should have known. It's too late. It's a terrible policy. I don't know why the left opposes, well, I do know why the left opposes Election Day. Because it provides more opportunities to game the system if you spread it out further. You provide access to the ballot 45 days ahead of time. The votes begin 45 days, as early as 45 days ahead of time. 2 weeks after Election Day, at least. Sometimes, I think it's up to 30 days in some jurisdictions. So you don't have an election day, you have election months. That's insanity. And to the degree it's unlawful, Judicial Watch is going to challenge it. So no, we haven't forgotten about election integrity. We haven't forgotten about the issues of 2020. We're trying to fix the structure of our election systems in a way that reassure the American people that their votes will be counted in an honest way and in a system in which they can have confidence in, no matter if you're a Republican or a Democrat or whatever. So, not only do we need to have systems in place to check fraud, but we need to reassure the American people that there's at least reasonable attempts made to check fraud. I know the left is crazed that, they talked about these modest changes in Georgia as being worse than Jim Crow. And now they're having to explain, well, if things are so terrible down there, why is voter turnout increasing? And it's no surprise to me that voter turnout is increasing in election systems where there is more security, because if people think their votes are going to count, they're more likely to vote. So what better way to encourage voter turnout than to provide systems in place and accounting, a way of counting that assures people that their votes are going to be counted, and that in the least there isn't the appearance that the system will be gamed. So this is a core issue. It's obviously going on now, but it's going to go on over the next 2 years, and Judicial Watch is in it for the long haul. I encourage you to support our work. We've been doing this for well over a decade. In fact, I was counting ballots. Judicial Watch was counting ballots way back in 2000 in Florida. I know how these games are played. I've been doing it longer than I probably want to admit to. 20 plus years of battling for clean elections. And those were paper ballots. So don't think just because, I know there are many people who don't like the computer systems, and I don't blame them for that, but don't think they won't try to cheat even with paper ballots. I mean, you've got to watch elections all the time. And so Judicial Watch has been instrumental in taking the lead on behalf of election integrity, and we will continue to do so despite the less efforts to try to, frankly, jail people who have questions about election integrity. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button and like our video down below.